Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Guys That Magic. This is Hunter and Dave again.
Yo.
We are continuing with the final Commander Precon set from Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. This time, the final time, we are talking about Draconic Rage. Draconic Rage is helmed by Vrondis, Rage of Ancients. Vrondis is a legendary creature dragon barbarian that costs 3 generic, a red, and a green. He is a 5/4. He has Enrage, which means whenever he is dealt damage, you may create a 5/4 red and green dragon spirit creature token with, when this creature deals damage, stack it. It also says whenever you roll 1 or more dice, you may have Vrondis deal 1 damage to itself. Dave, what do you think about this deck?
Well, I love his name and the difficulty you have in pronouncing this. I definitely think
Vrondis.
it sounds like some kind of venereal disease. So you may want to get it checked. I don't know, maybe you'll start getting some scales yourself. So I think this card I'm weird, and for formatting purposes, I have an issue here. I think Rondis is a dope card. And he very clearly has Enrage.
Mhm.
Okay, here we go. Zalto Fire Giant Duke, which is a card from the main set, has an ability that triggers whenever he is dealt damage. That's not called Enrage. So why is it that we get 2 legendary creatures, both from Forgotten Realms, given that, yes, I understand this one is technically from a separate product, with similar abilities, and only one of them gets the keyword?
Because Vrondis is special.
Yeah, he's special. All right, so getting into the actual deck and the actual card itself, this guy's pretty dope. He's super swole. Look at them traps and the triceps, dude. This guy's been working out.
Some traps and triceps.
Like, I mean, he's even got like a dragon beard going on. I can dig this. So, just kind of generally speaking, themes of this deck, he is all about dealing damage and dragon tribal. You're going to come across, I mean, almost every creature in this deck is a dragon card or some kind of utility card that cares about dragons, which is pretty dope.
Are you telling me a Dungeons and Dragons set cares about dragons?
I know, it's crazy to think that. So, this dude also cares about dealing damage to himself. Now, something that I wanted to look at from just the pre-constructed deck are what options do we have in here in terms of like you actually being able to deal damage to him. Now, I understand that you can always do it the good old-fashioned way by attacking in and hoping that your opponent blocks. However, realistically, they're kind of incentivized to not block. That way, you don't get a dragon out of it. So, I want to be able to control when I'm making those dragons and how many of those dragons I can make. Something that is very, very important to note about this card and the tokens that it produces, it makes 5/4 red and green dragons that do not have flying.
That doesn't make any sense, especially since they're spirits.
I get you. However, I had to reread this card a couple of times before I actually caught that, and I think that that is very significant. A 5/4 token is still a powerhouse of a token, but there is a massive difference between one that is on the ground and one that has flying that can go over and be a little bit more evasive to pump that damage through. Now, either way, it's still a big body, and it's still going to be pressuring your opponent, which is fantastic for you.
Hmm.
Looking at this deck as a whole, there are 8 cards in here that control whenever you can deal damage to this. Of those 8, 3 of them can very easily kill Vrondis. So it's not an effect that you probably want to actually be using to target him. There's not actually a whole lot of ways for you to be able to deal damage to him consistently with that. Now, his second ability says that whenever you roll 1 or more dice, you may have him deal 1 damage to himself. If my math is correct, there are 6 cards in this deck that involve rolling dice. If you've listened to the other videos up to this point, you've already heard me whine and bitch about how I hate the dice rolling cards. Because it is mechanically stapled to this creature, I'm not going to suggest you remove them. I also think the dice rolling cards that are included in this deck have a higher floor. So at their absolute worst, they're better than many of the other dice rolling cards in the other decks. So part of that also being is that at the absolute worst roll, if your commander's in play, he still makes a 5/4.
Yeah.
So
That's dope.
it's still you have a significantly higher upside here. So I'm not gonna say we remove those this time.
So if you're not removing the dice cards, then what are you removing?
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. There is still a lot that I'm gonna gut from this deck. So a theme, if you haven't noticed up to this point, is I don't like 7-mana spells. I don't like 8-mana spells or 9-mana spells or anything like that that costs some exuberant price because realistically, you're just not casting them. My other thought here being is this commander looks incredibly aggressive. This is not a commander that I want to have to go to the late game. This is something that I want to get in play quickly, make a ton of dragons, swing in, and just wreck face with. I don't want to make my game go to turn 10 or past that point because then that means that my opponents are interacting a little bit more than what I think they probably should be. And it exposes me to more board wipes, more removal, or my opponents just potentially comboing off or doing their thing. And we don't want that if we're playing this deck. So included in this, and I know that these are some big dragons, I'm going to take out Begarden Hellkite, Shivan Hellkite, Skyline Despot, Terror of Mount Velis, and Decree of Savagery. Decree of Savagery is not a dragon. That one's an instant, but it does cost 9 mana. Has a cycling ability on it too, which is what you're probably going to be doing the majority of the time. But I'm attacking in with several big things. If I cycle Decree of Savagery, it puts counters on it puts counters on my things, but it puts it on just one thing.
Right.
So I want to be hitting with the team. As far as cards that I think are a little bit just kind of off theme with this is like the last videos we've done, the secondary commander. So in this case, we have Wolfgar of Icewind Dale. This dude looks like a medieval redneck. I don't mean to offend all the Dungeons and Dragons players out there. I don't know the lore behind it. He could be really cool, but like this dude looks like a Dale.
He doesn't look so much like a Wolfgar, huh?
No, he does not. So he just doesn't necessarily really do a whole lot for me here. So it says if a creature you control attacking would cause a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. My commander doesn't have an attacking clause. My tokens that I'm making don't have an attacking clause. I don't care. Now, I know that some of the dragons in the deck do, and that's cool, but there's really just not enough targets for me to want to keep something like this included. And especially since like we're really heavy in this dragon theme, might as well just dive face first into it. And this dude's not a dragon either, so just get rid of him. So as far as the rest of this goes, there are a couple of cards in here that I think are just kind of bad. The first one here being Druid of Purification. So Druid of Purification is 3 and a green for a human druid. It's a 2/3, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, starting with you, each player may choose an artifact or an enchantment you don't control. Destroy each permanent chosen this way. I don't like giving my opponents options. Given that I'm not going to get hurt by any of this, it's still not something that I can necessarily control what we're getting rid of. And I don't want to spend 4 mana to get rid of something that I really want to, and then just like 3 other things.
Okay.
So the other card in here as well is Opportunistic Dragon. So this one has the ability to, it says that whenever it enters the battlefield, choose target human or artifact an opponent controls for as long as it remains on the battlefield, gain control of that permanent, and it loses all abilities and it can't attack or block. It's cool that you can steal one of your opponent's mana rocks, and I think for the most part that might be what you're doing. The human clause on this, I don't think is going to come up as often I don't think it's actually going to come up super often. Now, if you play these 4 commander decks against each other, then sure, you can steal the Esper commander, and you do have some various targets here or there, but it's not something that I necessarily want to be casting in this deck. There are
That
some
makes
other
sense.
cards in here that I feel like they're in the deck just because they're dragons. And that's things like Skyship Stalker and Demanding Dragon. Both of these cards, they're dragons. That's cool. They're not really all that great. Skyship Stalker is a mana sink, so it at least gives you something to do there. And Demanding Dragon is going to once again give your opponent a choice as to what its ETB is. It can deal 5 damage whenever it enters play. They're almost always just going to choose probably the 5 damage, unless they're really low on life, in which case, at that point, they'll choose the other option, and the other option is, what is it? I think it's like sacrifice a creature. Yeah, so unless they sacrifice a creature.
Gotcha.
So those are a couple cards that I want out of this deck just because I feel like they're not super good. I'm also going to take Ryle out of this deck. Now, Ryle is 1 mana. It's a single red mana for a sorcery, and it says deal 1 damage to target creature you control. That creature gains trample until end of turn, and then you draw a card. This is an effect it's really designed to ping Vrondus with, which is cool, and that's going to be something that I'm going to definitely be talking about here in a moment. But it's a one-time effect. It does cantrip, which is nice, but if I'm going to be including these pinging effects, I really want them to be on a permanent. That way I can abuse this and do this over and over and over again, or potentially several times per turn. So I can really make a ton of dragons that way.
I gotcha.
Shamanic Revelation is another card that I would take out of this deck. It is card draw, which is important. So Shamanic Revelation is 3 green for a sorcery. It says draw a card for each creature you control, and then it has Ferocious if you control, you gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. I could be making a mistake by removing this card because both of those abilities are very powerful. However, I don't know how many cards this is actually going to draw you. The life gain thing might be relevant, and this is a deck that is going to be making tokens. So you may actually be able to draw several cards off of this. I just like my draw cards to typically be something where I know if it hits play, it's going to stick around. So it's going to be a permanent. It's going to be an engine that I know I can continue to rely on. So these single time effects really aren't something that I want to rely on, especially whenever there might be some situations where I need to draw some cards and I need to get back into the game and I don't have creatures because I'm already behind. And in which case, this does nothing for me, or it may be a 5 mana, draw 1 or draw 2 cards. And I just don't really want those kinds of effects.
Hopefully you're not making a mistake.
So we'll see. That was one that I looked at and I said, I mean, I can definitely see an argument for why it is that you should be including this and keeping it into the deck still. But we're going to be swapping those out for a couple of different cards. So moving forward, this deck really doesn't run a whole lot of ramp. And it runs a lot of expensive, big, smashy dragons. And just looking over the deck list, almost every creature in this deck requires 2 or more pips. So 2 or more specific colors of mana, which means your mana base is going to be stressed playing this deck. So I would like to include some more ramp in here. I know that they are not dragons, but I am a huge advocate of including like the elf package. So your Llanowar elf and your Arbor elf and all of those little dudes, those 1 mana 1/1s or 1 mana 0/1s you can tap to add a green or some other color. So I would be throwing those in. I'd be throwing in Bird of Paradise just so that I can make sure that I'm not having those mana problems. I would also, in this deck, be including things like Talisman of Impulse, which is the talisman of these colors. I would be throwing in Felwar Stone, which is in some of the other precons, but not included in this one. I'd even be throwing in Mind Stone, It's a 2 mana rock that can later on you can sack it to draw a card. One thing that I thought was really interesting from this is that we just got Dragonkind, which
The Orb of
is
Dragonkind.
the Orb of Dragonkind, which is a card from the set in red that ramps you towards dragons. And it's not included in this. And that might just be Wizards of the Coast making like this obvious thing of like, hey, go out and go buy some packs so that you can open up this card. Don't do that, by the way. Actually, just go buy the card. But I think that that would be a fantastic include in here as well, because it's helping you to ramp into your dragons. It's going to be helping you with getting these guys out faster. So we need to include a little bit more ramp in here. I also really want to be adding in some more pingers. So pingers being creatures or some other permanents that we'll talk about too, that can deal damage directly to Vrondis. Because I want to make sure that even if my opponents aren't blocking him, I'm still making those dragons as often as I possibly can. So
Okay.
what I'm looking at here are creatures, for example, things like Goblin Sharpshooter, which is a small creature you can tap and you can deal 1 damage to any target. Things like Kamuno Master Yamabushi, if I may be saying that incorrectly, which same thing, you pay mana this time and you can deal damage to a specific target. But the wonderful thing about this is that he's really easy to be able to hit Vrondis 1, 2, 3 times in a single turn, and you could be doing this on your opponent's turn as well to spontaneously make some blockers if you need them to. So Chandra, the Firebrand, is another card that I have included in here. This is a Planeswalker that pings. So it can deal 1 damage to target creature or player, and you can end up hitting Vrondis with this. So getting a little bit of extra benefit there. Marauding Raptor is another card that I looked at, given that you actually have to have this one in play before you play Vrondis, but that's fine because it's a smaller creature. And then the last one here being Staff of Nen. I wanted to add a little bit more card draw, and with this being a card, so it's a 6 mana artifact, and the way that it works is you get to draw an additional card at the beginning, or you get to draw an additional card each turn, and you can tap it to deal 1 damage to any target. So you tap it to deal 1 damage to Vrondis, so he's making those dragons more consistently, and you're also drawing an extra card each turn off of this.
That's pretty good. That's very good in this deck.
So have some of those. As far as some other things that I wanted to put in here, I really wanted to focus more on draw, just because I figured, a lot of our creatures are just going to be kind of like pooping out from our commander.
Okay.
I got a mental image there of him like running around the battlefield laying eggs, and I know that that's not what he's doing. He's like summoning these dragon spirits, but I don't know. That's just the way that my brain works. So things like Elemental Bond, which is an enchantment that draws you a card every time you make a token in this deck. So it draws you a card anytime you have a creature enter play with, I think it's power 3 or power 4 or greater, which the dragons that you're making meet that clause. So you're going to draw a card on every dragon you make, and every dragon you cast too, because some of your dragons in this deck are huge. Things like Hunter's Insight.
My insight?
Yeah, your Insight. Another card that you can be drawing multiple cards off of. And then also, I have included Toski, Bearer of Secrets. Toski, Bearer of Secrets is the legendary squirrel that we got in Kaldheim. It says
You
whatever
love squirrels.
I don't like squirrels, but I do like this little guy. So I like him because he cares about you swinging in and smacking your opponents with multiple creatures per turn, and you're going to be drawing cards for every creature that you hit your opponent with. So in a deck that cares about these tokens, it has these big beefy creatures that your opponents either may not want to block because, for example, if they block Vrondis, he makes a dragon, or they might not be capable of blocking because you're attacking it with a 5/4. So he cares about that, and he's going to be drawing you a couple cards off of it. That just kind of generally speaking would be the direction that I would want to take this deck in. I feel like this deck is super focused and that it very much so cares about dealing damage, and it very much so cares about Dragon Tribal. I think this one is a little bit more restrictive if you are looking to really pick this one up and experiment around with it. I feel like it is much more straightforward in the way that it wants to be upgraded. So unlike the last deck that we talked about where it was very open, where you have like 3 or 4 different strategies that you could be implementing. I feel like this guy really kind of narrows it down to just like
The
1 or
last
2.
deck being Dungeons of Death.
The last deck being Dungeons of Death. Yeah. Yes. But all in all, I think straight out of the box, this is probably the best to potentially second best out of these pre-constructed commander decks.
So you're saying go out and buy it.
If you like attacking with big smashy things, this is straight up your alley. Yeah, go up and pick this one up. If you are trying to experiment around and upgrade and like have a little bit more creativity and personalize your deck a little bit more, I don't know if I would recommend this one because he's very narrow, but he's still it's a solid commander, so I'm not going to argue with it.
That sounds great. I really like all of the upgrades. Again, every single video we've done, all your upgrades are solid. So, once again, I think you've
Not,
made this deck pretty strong.
I'm not used to you agreeing with me. I feel like I need a little bit more negativity directed at me. So out of
Maybe,
curiosity,
yeah, okay.
now that we've gone over all 4 of these, which of these 4, if any, would you personally be most likely to go pick up and play
I
in
think
paper?
you are well aware of the one I would pick up.
Oh, it's 100% Draconic Rage.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
the beat face guy, and this is up my alley.
so solid pre-constructed decks. I think as a whole, me personally, I do like these more than the Strixhaven ones. I actually wasn't a big fan of the Strixhaven ones, with the exception of the Boros deck, or Strixhaven Boros. I forgot the name.
It's Lordhold, man.
That's Boros.
Yeah, overall, I really enjoyed all these pre-con decks. I think they're pretty dope. Can't wait for them to come out. Maybe we'll pick them up and give them a try. If you guys liked this video, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And coming up, we will be doing the legendary commanders of the actual set of Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So be on the lookout for that. Subscribe to make sure you do not miss it. It's going to be a good one. Commander grades. We are definitely going to have different opinions on those. Until next time, hope you guys have a great day. This is Guys That Magic. Later.
Take it easy.